Sarah, what's going on? There's no way we can pass the internal review with such poorly prepared materials. Surely you understand that, right? From the other side of the partition, I heard my classmate Sarah being scolded by our supervisor, Chris. Sarah clenched her fists in frustration, saying, "I am truly sorry." Peeking through the gap in the partition, I felt something was off about the contents displayed on the laptop screen pointed at by our manager. David. Today, I would fulfill that promise from long ago and become Sarah's hero. I pushed myself and said, "Wait a minute, Chris." Stepping into the corner, I did everything I could to restore Sarah's honor. My name is Jim. People say everyone has their strengths and weaknesses, but I have recently realized that I am someone who is particularly prone to the latter. This is because, at my current job at Green Valley Foods, I am constantly assigned to tasks that do not suit me, causing me intense stress every day. Specifically, my duties include preparing meeting materials from printed documents, cleaning the conference rooms, and serving coffee, in other words, all the menial tasks. I have always been clumsy, and even tasks that others find simple often took me a long time to finish or I failed to do them properly. The reason I ended up at Green Valley Foods was because my previous workplace went bankrupt. At that company, I was given tasks that suited me perfectly, making work much more comfortable. However, after the owner of my previous company passed away due to illness, a succession dispute broke out. As a result, the company's performance deteriorated, and all the employees lost their jobs. At 31 years old and unemployed, I struggled with my poor communication skills. I had been smoothly introduced to my previous job by my college professor. However, presenting my strengths and enthusiasm for work to strangers was extremely difficult for me. After more than 6 months of job hunting without receiving a single offer, Green Valley Foods finally took me in. The reason they hired me despite my poor communication skills was because Green Valley Foods placed a high value on academic background. Impressive credentials. You're hired on the spot. When I attended the interview, I was taken aback by the interviewer's immediate offer. I graduated from one of the top 3 universities in the country, and Green Valley Foods was eager to have someone with my background join their ranks. Thank you. I'll do my best, so please take care of me. Having been overwhelmed by my own helplessness for the past 6 months, I was deeply grateful to Green Valley Foods for accepting me with just a brief self-introduction. However, once I started working, I was assigned only with menial tasks. The reason was that during my training period, my innate clumsiness had become apparent. Even simple tasks like stapling documents and setting up conference rooms properly were beyond my capabilities, leading the company to quickly give up on me. With such poor performance on basic tasks, there's no way we can assign you anything more important. Chris, who had watched my failures with a tone of exasperation, had not given me anything but menial tasks since. But at that time, I was desperate to avoid being fired, so I complied with Chris's orders and performed the menial tasks. As a result, nearly a year after joining, I am now labeled as the highly educated but incompetent person who can't even handle menial tasks. In reality, it is rare for me to perform these tasks without any mistakes, so I cannot argue against this label. I once overheard other employees questioning Chris why I was still employed. The president of Green Valley Foods said that having someone from such a prestigious university on staff could attract more talented individuals. So, just bear with him. Apparently, they hired me merely to boost the company's reputation as a workplace chosen by a prestigious university graduate. Although I am not openly criticized, I feel uncomfortable being treated like an outsider because of the company's emphasis on education. Even so, afraid of losing my job, I worked diligently, and one morning during the daily meeting, I had a fateful reunion. This is Sarah, who will be working with us starting today. She was scouted from Pioneer Foods, which we have dealings with. We expect her to be an immediate asset. The woman introduced by Chris was a stunning beauty with short hair, impeccably dressed in a business suit. Pioneer Foods, a subcontractor of Green Valley Foods, is a company that produces a wide range of processed foods, including frozen foods. Sarah, who had handled a wide range of tasks from sales to product development at Pioneer Foods, had been headhunted to our company. I couldn't hide my surprise when I saw her. We attended the same middle and high school, and were classmates for all 3 years of high school. After going our separate ways for university, I hadn't seen her since. I never imagined I would meet Sarah again in a place like this. After the meeting, I approached Sarah as she made her way to her desk. "Hi, long time no see. Do you remember me? I'm Jim. We went to the same middle and high school." I stammered. My colleagues were surprised that I, who had become increasingly withdrawn due to being treated like an outsider, had initiated a conversation with the newcomer. However, Sarah merely glanced at me with her sharp eyes and said, "Jim. Sorry, I don't quite remember," before waving lightly and heading to her desk. Feeling dejected, I started my work with a renewed sense of insignificance and a heavy heart. Being forgotten by Sarah left me so devastated that I couldn't focus on my work at all. Even the document preparation, which should have been finished long ago, wasn't completed. Left alone in the office, I sat at my desk in the corner, feeling utterly hopeless about my clumsiness. This page goes. Wait, where did the stapler go? Oh, the pages are out of order. Though I could easily organize information in my head, the moment I had to make paper documents, my desk became a mess. And my work came to a standstill. Adding to this was my innate clumsiness, making it impossible to keep track of what I was doing. Falling into a vicious cycle, I felt like giving up, but then I heard an unexpected voice. "Still struggling with this kind of work, I see." Sarah walked straight to my desk, tidied it up, and explained the order in which I should complete my tasks. "Some people are particular about how you staple documents, so try to align the angles properly. But if that's too difficult, just staple them in this order." Following Sarah's instructions, my work began to flow smoothly, like a highway cleared of traffic. Thanks to her help, I finished my assigned work in just about 30 minutes. "Thank you. If it wasn't for you, I wouldn't have finished this quickly." When I thanked her, Sarah smiled and shook her head. "It's nothing. If this is all it takes, I'll help you again. Well, I'm off now." As she turned to leave, I hurriedly called out, "Sarah. This morning, you said you didn't remember me, right?" She turned to face me, a hand on her mouth, and said, "I didn't want to keep the senior employees waiting. I may not have your level of memory, but I'm confident in mine. I wouldn't forget a classmate that easily." Her graceful gesture encouraged me to muster the courage to make a suggestion. Would you like to have dinner tonight? I'd like to thank you by treating you." It was rare for me to invite someone out, given my poor communication skills. The fact that she was a familiar face from school and my gratitude for her help pushed me to ask. She thought for a moment and then asked, "What's your monthly salary?" Confused, I answered honestly, "Just as I thought, I'm earning more than you." "It wouldn't be right for you to treat someone who earns more." "Let's do this another time," she said, waving lightly as she left the office. The next day, she fully immersed herself in her work, showcasing her abilities. Using her experience from Pioneer Foods, where she handled everything from sales to product development, she pitched a new product idea within the company. Within 6 months, her proposed replacement food series entered the trial phase. Even though she was a mid-career hire, the fact that she achieved this much within a year made Chris, who had scouted her, proud. "She's impressive. Just as I expected. Everyone should learn from her," he praised her during the morning meeting. Seeing her excel made me genuinely happy. Though she graduated from a mid-tier public university, she was much more dedicated and efficient than the prestigious university graduates, including myself. At the same time, I couldn't help but feel a sense of loneliness. For the first month after she joined, she would occasionally stay late to help me with my work, but recently, she seemed beyond my reach. And we rarely talked. Looking for an opportunity, I asked, "Is there anything I can help with? Handling menial tasks is my job, so please let me know." She always would glance at me and say, "There's nothing I need help with right now. I'll let you know if I need anything. Thanks for asking." Before returning to her work, the girl who once felt so close during our school days had grown into a competent professional, far beyond my reach. Realizing this, I stopped approaching her altogether. About a week after her product entered the trial phase, I was working late, sorting documents in the partitioned space in the office, when I overheard my colleague Jessica's voice. She seemed to be complaining to a male coworker. "Don't you think Sarah is suspicious? Everything is going too well for her. Jessica, who was 2 years older than me, had worked here since graduating from college. While she was somewhat successful, she seemed jealous of Sarah's achievements, and her attitude towards Sarah was often harsh. Though she spoke coldly to female colleagues, she adopted a more endearing tone when speaking to male colleagues. With her childlike appearance, Jessica often managed to get male co-workers to help her. I heard a rumor that Sarah is flirting with Chris and David. It's just a rumor, but there is no smoke without fire, right? Hearing Jessica's words, I felt my blood boil. I quickly stood up and moved to the other side of the partition, shouting, "Sarah would never do something like that. You don't know anything about her, so stop making baseless comments." My voice echoed through the office. Fortunately, only Jessica, the male coworker listening to her, and I were in the office, but the two of them stared at me wide-eyed, shocked by my sudden appearance. It seemed they hadn't realized I was on the other side of the partition. "Who do you think you are, acting so high and mighty just because you got hired for your credentials?" Jessica, who had always looked down on me, turned bright red with anger at my unexpected outburst. Sure, I might be someone who can't even handle menial tasks properly, but that doesn't matter right now. Determined to protect Sarah's honor, I was about to say more when the sound of heels clicking echoed through the office. And Sarah herself walked in. Jessica, the male coworker, and I stared at her in surprise as Sarah fixed her sharp gaze on me and said, "I know you're trying to defend me. But you need to be mindful of your volume. You could be disturbing others." While I stood there, dejected, Sarah turned her attention to Jessica and said, "For him to get this angry, you must have said something pretty awful. Mostly that I'm trading sexual favors or something like that? Don't worry, I don't have to do that, I can still get results." With that, she saw through Jessica's remarks and left the office. Her composed demeanor seemed to infuriate Jessica even more, and from that point on, Jessica began to openly harass her. "Sarah, make some coffee. This is a job for the newcomer. Don't rely on Jim, I'm asking you to do it." Usually, tasks like making coffee would be done by whoever was free. Which was mostly my job were now being unfairly assigned to Sarah under the guise of her being the newcomer. However, Sarah remained disturbed and said, "Understood. Does anyone have a preferred temperature?" Stopping her work, she complied with Jessica's unreasonable demands. With her work frequently interrupted, Sarah, like me, ended up staying late. She needed to analyze the data from the new product trial phase and devise improvements. When I asked if there was anything I could help with, she massaged her temples and looked up at the ceiling. "I'd like to say I'm fine, but I'm really tired of staring at the screen. Could you read the data out loud for me? Hearing it might spark some ideas." For the first time since she joined the company, I heard her voice sounding vulnerable. Following her request, I read out the data on the texture, flavor, and size of the new product. The data was extensive, and it took nearly an hour to read it all. "It's done, Sarah." "Wait, what?" When I looked up from the screen, she was leaning back in her chair, her eyes covered with her hand, gently snoring. Unsure of what to do, I hesitated until she suddenly jerked awake. "Sorry, I guess I couldn't help it. Listening to numbers makes me sleepy." "Just like in school," she said with an embarrassed smile. Her charming gesture, a stark contrast to her usual cool demeanor, made my heart skip a beat. To hide my embarrassment, I turned to her and said, "Aren't you exhausted? You've been working non-stop, and Jessica's harassment isn't stopping. Why not talk to Chris about it?" After a moment of contemplation, she shook her head slightly. "That won't solve anything. I need to succeed despite the interference to earn her respect. Besides..." She looked directly into my eyes. Swallowing hard, I watched as she slowly smiled and said, "Talking to you like this helps me feel better. Just like in high school." I remembered the summer of our senior year when she had to organize our class's event for the school festival as the class president. Our classmates, mostly preoccupied with college entrance exams, was uncooperative, leaving Sarah to do most of the work alone. I stayed late at school for some reason and ended up listening to her struggles. "Just like now. The school festival, right?" "I remember," I replied. Nodding, she smiled warmly. "Just as I thought. Well, I feel refreshed, so let's get back to work. You have tasks to finish too, right? Let's get them done quickly." Despite Jessica's ongoing harassment, she worked tirelessly for a week. During that time, I stayed late to help her, although I wasn't sure I was doing enough. But every time, she would leave with a bright smile, saying, "Thank you, you really helped me a lot." Then, one day, as the trial modifications were about to enter the next stage, Chris called Sarah over. She was summoned to the partitioned area where I had once prepared documents. This spot, occupying a corner of the office, was often used by Chris for detailed work. "Sarah, what is going on? If I submit such a poorly done report to David, I'll be the one getting chewed out." From the voice coming from the other side of the partition, it seemed like Chris was scolding Sarah. "With such sloppy data, it will be difficult to improve. At this rate, we'll be overtaken by other candidates. How do you plan to take responsibility?" His voice was filled with anger, while Sarah could only repeatedly apologize in a voice as quiet as a mosquito's, "I'm sorry." At that moment, a conversation from my school days with Sarah came to mind. If I can't help her now, when will I ever become a hero? Clenching my fists in determination, I stepped to the other side of the partition, calling out loudly, "Chris, she didn't make any mistakes." They looked at me with wide eyes. "Jim, do you know what you're doing? If you realize you're only here out of pity, you'd better leave right now." Chris tried to dismiss me with a tone of exasperation, but I couldn't back down here. Pointing at the laptop in front of Chris, I said, "The data can't be wrong. Because originally, it looked like this." And began to recite the words and figures I remembered from the document. As Chris stared in disbelief, I indicated the laptop with my eyes. "I'll say it again, compare it with the screen. With this data, you'll see it makes sense." After about 10 minutes of comparing the data with the laptop screen, Chris looked at me and said, "If your data is correct, this report should be sufficient." But what on earth happened? Sarah helped me out when I was at a loss for words. He's got a very high IQ, especially in terms of memory and recalling it at will. She answered simply, looking somewhat proud. She continued, "He must have remembered the data while helping me with the report. Honestly, even I didn't remember the data this accurately. So I'm really grateful he was there." "Oh, is that so?" Chris, still in shock, listened as I shared my hypothesis based on my memory. That laptop isn't connected to the network, so anyone who tampered with it had to be here in the office. If we check the time cards from when Sarah and I left the office yesterday, we should be able to identify who altered the data. Our company has surveillance cameras, so they could serve as evidence. When I looked at Sarah, she nodded slightly. She must have a sense of who the culprit might be as well. At that moment, someone came rushing over from the other side of the partition. That person came at us with incredible speed, saying, "I'm sorry. I tampered with the data out of jealousy over Sarah's success. After I left yesterday, I regretted it, but I couldn't bring myself to confess." She bowed deeply to both Chris and Sarah, offering words of apology. My loud voice must have reached Jessica on the other side of the partition. Realizing the danger, Jessica tried to minimize the damage by apologizing first. But this is a very serious issue. Even Chris, who was relatively lenient with Jessica, seemed troubled by this situation. Pulling down a colleague in the same department could very well result in being fired. However, an unexpected person resolved the situation. "Chris, I don't want her to face harsh punishment. Since joining the company, I haven't been able to build close relationships with my colleagues because I've been so focused on work, so I also share some blame." She urged Jessica to lift her head and said, "Please, can we let this incident slide?" Sarah, the one who had been wronged, bowed her head to Chris. With her plea, Chris had no choice but to relent. "All right, everyone, let's do that." Accepting Sarah's proposal, he called out to the employees on the other side of the partition. That night, I found myself at a stylish bar with Sarah, who had invited me. The bar had a quiet atmosphere, and thanks to our seat at a corner table in the hall, we could enjoy our conversation undisturbed. In such a setting, Sarah was the first to speak. "Thank you, you were amazing. It was like the school festival all over again." Her words of praise were almost too much for me. "Yeah, I remember. You were just summarizing the class's ideas, but some guys picked a fight with you. Back then, the uncooperative boys didn't like her lead and complained, 'We can't accept a plan that the chairperson decided on her own.' Not wanting to see her vilified, I recited everyone's comments from the homeroom when the plan was decided, word for word. Thanks to you, I was cleared of deciding it on my own. But instead, you ended up being seen as creepy by the class. I really appreciated it at that time. Her repeated words of thanks made my heart swell. It's nothing. I just wanted to help. As I stammered, she shook her head firmly. Looking me straight in the eyes, she said, I'm so sly. I always think about how to handle things smoothly, keeping an eye on others' reactions. That's why I pretended not to know you on my first day at the company. I'm sorry, you must be disappointed. Her voice shook as she apologized. This is the second time I've seen her looking so frail. Back in our school days, she always seemed so dependable and dignified, but I never knew she had this side to her. Seeing this new side of her, I clenched my fists to muster my courage and said as firmly as I could, I'm not disappointed. I want to keep my promise. I've always wanted to be Sarah's hero. She turned away, pressing her eyes. You remember that promise? Your memory is amazing. That day when we stayed late preparing for the school festival, she had said half-jokingly, I believe in heroes. I don't tell my friends this because they'd laugh at me, but what do you think, Jim? I admired her even, back then for her boldness and self-assuredness. Summoning the courage from within, I replied, I think they exist. And if you ever stop believing in heroes, I'll become your hero. Thinking back, it was an embarrassingly bold statement. She had gone silent for a moment but then clapped her hands and laughed. Jim as a hero, huh? That's nice. I'll be waiting for you to save me like a hero would. She stuck out her tongue playfully. Recalling that moment, she looked down, embarrassed. Back then, I was so condescending. I'm sorry, I couldn't be honest because I was embarrassed. Because, I've always admired you, Jim. Not comprehending her words, I froze, speechless. Seeing me, she scratched her head sheepishly and said, You were always so smart but never arrogant. You were always modest. And whenever someone struggled in class, you'd help them out. I admired that about you. She fidgeted with her hands and smiled warmly. I got so excited when you said you'd become a hero for me. Thank you for keeping your promise. Hearing her true feelings made my eyes well up. I have to step up now if I want to be a hero. Encouraging myself, I turned to her and said, I want to always be your hero. Will you go out with me? Sarah said, of course. Let's go out together. I'm lucky to be with a hero. Responding with a smile so broad it created laugh lines. Later, her proposed new product successfully completed its trial phase and was launched to the market. Thanks to her advocacy about my help, I transitioned from menial tasks to a data management role that utilized my memory skills. A year later, I took her to the restaurant where I had confessed. I have earned more. I can't compete with you yet, but let me treat you tonight. I said. I proposed paying for our date, which had always been split evenly. I'm sorry, it was pretentious of me. That was just pride. I used to think that being treated by a man meant being looked down on. Recalling her past self, she looked quite endearing compared to her usual dignified demeanor. Determined to take our relationship to the next level, I presented her a ring box. I want to be with you. I'll be the hero who protects you and our future family. She looked back and forth between me and the ring box, taking deep breaths. Pointing at the box, she said, Put it on me. Being given a ring by my hero, I'm truly lucky, extending her slender finger. We reunited in an unexpected way, turned our school day dreams into reality and embarked on a new path together as a family.